in the 1980s, the CIA knowingly permitted black neighborhoods to be flooded with crack.
It's a drug war, but I don't, we don't know. We're not in it. I don't have nothing to do with it.
Before Snowfall became one of TV's rawest depictions of the crack era, the story had already been written in the streets.
Anybody can sell drugs. You can be by yourself and sell drugs.
Before Franklin Saint built his empire on screen, men like Lil D. Reed and Waterhead Bo Bennett were running multi-million-dollar networks in their teens.
So you started selling crack at, was it 16?
No, I was like, about 16. Yep, I was 16. Yep, I was 16. And when I was in high school, going to Fremont High.
Okay. And by 18 years old, you had stacked millions of dollars.
By 18 years old, I was a millionaire.
Uncle Jerome, Louie, Kane, they all have roots in flesh and blood hustlers who lived, killed, and paid the price for control. But they weren't characters. They were case files, mugshots, and headlines in real life.
So he's calling you up and say, hey, I got 100 kilos for you for 10,000 a kilo.
We didn't start at 10,000.
Oh, what did it start at?
It started at 17, I think it was.
And once you hear how these real kingpins rose and fell, you'll realize the show was never just entertainment. It was a reflection of true American ambition gone dark. Let's talk about it. Sylvester O.G. Puddin Scott inspired Uncle Jerome Saint. Sylvester O.G. Puddin Scott's story began long before Snowfall ever rolled its first frame. His name carried the kind of weight that made people lower their voices when they said it. Born in Watts in 1954 and later raised in Compton, Puddin came of age in a city already splitting apart. The 1970s Los Angeles he walked through was fractured, poverty, police pressure, and a new kind of street order starting to form. And in that chaos, Puddin carved his place. He was one of the first to say no to the growing power of the Crips and form something to stand against it. The crew he helped start, the Piru Street Boys, would later unite other sets and evolve into what became known as the Bloods. It was supposed to be about protection, survival, unity, but the story didn't stay clean for long. Puddin's leadership came with blood on it. People called him a psychopath, a killing machine, and on the streets, that was confirmation that you were real.
Pull them forward, you turn them around. What it say, jamming Jerome?
There's a story people in Compton still whisper, that Puddin shot Stanley Tookie Williams, one of the Crips co-founders, in the legs back in the day. Whether it's truth or a legend doesn't matter anymore. The story itself gave Puddin myth status. When his green 69 Riviera rolled through the neighborhood, corners emptied. People just got out of the way. He wasn't just feared, he was an institution. His name alone carried decades of street memory, the kind Uncle Jerome Saint carried in Snowfall when he walked into a room and everyone stopped talking. Both men came from an older generation of hustlers who believed in rules, in loyalty, and something beyond just money. The difference is, Jerome's story got softened for television. Puddin's didn't.
How about you get the drop when I say you get the f***ing drop? How about that then?
By the mid-1980s, the city had changed. The game had changed. The young cats were running wild, chasing fast money, stacking bodies, and leaving behind the codes men like Puddin lived by. He came home from prison in 1987 to a new Los Angeles, one flooded with crack and paranoia. Not long after, narcotics cops from the Southwest Division raided his parents' home on West Piru Street. They claimed they found 118 grams of in his car, but later, prosecutors admitted the bust was dirty. Cops had planted the drugs. $16,000 in cash disappeared from the house after the search. It didn't matter. Puddin went back to prison anyway. Uncle Jerome's story in Snowfall mirrors that fallen spirit. A man who watched his own people turn against themselves, who saw respect traded for profit, who realized too late that the young generation didn't care about the rules he built his life on. When Jerome finally dies in the show, protecting Louie, his wife, his pride, is not just a plot point. It's a quiet nod to all the real men like Puddin who gave their lives to a code that no longer existed by the time they tried to live by it. Freeway Ricky Ross inspired Franklin Saint. Now, Freeway Ricky Ross was just a kid from South Central who couldn't read, trying to make something of himself in a system that had already decided a ceiling. But what he built and what he became would go on to shape the blueprint of one of TV's most chilling and realistic drug lords, Franklin Saint. When Ricky discovered that school and sports couldn't save him because he was functionally illiterate, he turned to what the streets did best, making money.
When you go to prison, you can't read. And the first book that you do read is the autobiography of Malcolm X.
At first, Ricky's operation was small, a few grams here and there. He wasn't flashy, he didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't use. That businessman's mindset became a superpower. While others hustled for quick flips, Ricky studied the trade like it was economics. He bought cheap, sold smart, built relationships. Within months, he was moving from the corners to the city blocks. Within years, he was moving hundreds of kilos a week. He wasn't just part of the crack era, he defined it. At his peak, Ricky was moving so much weight that his profits hit over $3 million a day. His operation stretched across states, supplying gangs from the Bloods to the Crips and building a distribution network that rivaled legitimate corporations. But his rise wasn't powered by just street hustle. There was something, or rather someone, behind it. That someone was Oscar Danilo Blandon, a smooth-talking Nicaraguan exile who promised Ricky an endless supply of high-quality at prices no one else could touch. Blandon was plugged into something far bigger, the US government's secret war in Nicaragua. The money from Ricky's crack empire wasn't just buying mansions or cars, it was being funneled back into the CIA-backed Contra army fighting the Sandinistas. Ricky didn't know. He thought he was just buying product, but in reality, he was fueling an international operation that connected South Central to Washington.
The government was investing in Freeway Rick.
Oh yeah, no, the government was using drug profits
Right.
that he was involved in to finance a war in South America.
Right.
This is where fiction and reality start to blur. In Snowfall, Franklin Saint's supplier Teddy McDonald is a CIA agent running the same kind of covert war. Franklin, like Ricky, believes he's in control, that he's running a business, not a conspiracy. But just like the real story, the power isn't his. It never was. The CIA's involvement was real. But like Franklin, Ricky's empire couldn't last. By the early 90s, the government wanted a face for the damage crack had done. And Blandon, the same man who helped him rise, flipped on him. In 1995, he set Ricky up in a DEA sting in San Diego. Ricky was caught trying to buy 100 kilos of and the same system that had once looked the other way suddenly came crashing down on him. He was sentenced to life under California's 3 strikes law. Cornell Ward inspired Leon. Cornell Corndog Ward was the friend who stayed loyal when everyone else was chasing power. He grew up with Freeway Ricky Ross, ran beside him through South Central, and watched the streets turn from playgrounds into powder trails. If Ricky built the empire, Cornell kept the foundation standing, handling distribution, settling disputes, keeping things quiet. But behind that loyalty was a man who never stopped asking himself what it was all costing. Before the streets, he had a different dream. Ward was a college football All-American at Compton College, the kind of athlete who could have made it big. But when his athletic career hit a dead end, he followed Ricky into trade, using his college refund check as his first investment. That small decision changed everything. Soon he was running with the Freeway Boys, part of a machine that unknowingly fed the CIA's covert war efforts through the crack epidemic. For a while, it felt like success until it didn't. The system that made him rich was the same one that broke him. One night, Ward was brutally beaten by members of the so-called Freeway Rick Task Force, a corrupt police unit that saw arrests as sport. They split his lip, cracked his teeth, left him needing over 30 stitches. That moment shattered whatever illusion he still had about the life he was living. He was just another young black man feeding a system that was built to chew him up. That's the moment Leon Simmons' Snowfall's conscience was born. Leon's rage, his guilt, his desperate need to make peace with what he's done, all of that comes from Cornell. Both were right hands who watched power destroy the men they followed. Both carried the weight of violence and the guilt of survival. Leon's transformation from hot-headed soldier to community leader mirrors Cornell's real-life turn from enforcer to mentor.
Went to the crib, poured a drink, Watch the sun rise on the roof.
After his beating, Cornell didn't just walk away. He spoke up. He testified against the very officers who'd brutalized him, and in 1994 made a vow to leave the drug trade behind for good. It wasn't clean or easy. Redemption never is. He threw himself into coaching and youth mentorship, trying to steer kids off the same road he once paved, but tragedy followed him. One night after sending a group of young boys home from practice, he learned they'd been killed in a stolen car crash. The guilt nearly dragged him back to the streets, but he didn't fold. He kept going. Over time, Cornell became the head coach at Compton College, using his past as a lesson, not a curse. Jemeker Thompson inspired Louie. Jemeker Thompson had style, poise, and calculation that could silence a room. She was the kind of woman who ran a man's world. They called her the kingpin of South Central, and not because she shouted the loudest, but because she was the one people listened to when it mattered. Before the streets knew her name, she was selling hair, a small businesswoman hustling honestly. But like many stories born in South Central during the 80s, survival had a price, and ambition came dressed in temptation. Her entry into the game wasn't planned. Jemeker fell in love with a man named Anthony Daff Mosley, a street dealer with charm, muscle, and vision. Together, they made money moving cannabis through LA's underground economy. When Daff was murdered, most people expected her to disappear, maybe start over somewhere else. Instead, she did what few women ever dared. She took the throne.
I think with me able to transition from being a drug dealer to a hair distributor, I would call myself an entrepreneur.
The same determination that helped her sell hair out of a suitcase now fueled an empire that stretched from Los Angeles to Detroit, St. Louis, and beyond. In Snowfall, Aunt Louie takes that same blueprint and makes it her own. Like Jemeker, Louie starts in the background, Jerome's partner, always watching, always learning. But when the moment comes, she steps forward and proves she was never just an accessory to someone else's power. The nightclub becomes her version of Jemeker's hair business, glamorous, respectable on the outside, but built with drug money underneath. By the late 80s, Jemeker was moving serious weight, reportedly earning over $1 million a week. She did it quietly, methodically, without chaos. Federal agents began to whisper her name, and even her own mother was warned by the FBI that her daughter had become one of the country's biggest distributors. Still, Jemeker kept it cool. The operation ran through layers of friends and loyal connections. It's the same quiet dominance that Louie embodies when she starts making moves behind Franklin's back, negotiating deals and tightening her circle, even as paranoia starts to set in. But every empire has cracks, and in both stories, love becomes the weak spot. For Jemeker, her fall came not from greed, but from something painfully human. After years on the run, living under aliases, she decided to come home just to see her son graduate from 6th grade. The feds were waiting. As they moved in to arrest her, she asked them for one last favor, to hug her boy before they took her away. That small moment of tenderness, surrounded by handcuffs and cameras, said more about her humanity than any headline about her crimes ever could.
I want to live because my son already lost his father, and I said I don't want to abandon my son like that. So I choose life, and my life was in Jesus, which gave me everlasting life.
Louie's story follows a similar emotional thread. The closer she gets to power, the more she loses her sense of peace. Her love for Jerome becomes both her reason and her ruin. She's haunted by the same thing that caught Jemeker, the need to hold on to something real in a world built on paranoia. Where Jemeker risked it all to be a mother again, Louie risks it all to be free. From Franklin, from the game, from the fear that she'll never have control unless she takes it herself. Thomas Tootie Reese inspired multiple characters. Before South Central had a crack epidemic, there was Thomas Tootie Reese, a man everyone quietly called the godfather of LA crack. In the 1970s, when most of Los Angeles still saw crack weed as the dominant trades, Tootie was already thinking bigger. He saw crack not as a party drug, but as a product, one he could control from the source. Reese built what would become the original model for high-volume on the West Coast. While most dealers worked through layers of middlemen, he made direct connections to Colombian suppliers, cutting out the middle and maximizing profit. It sounds simple now, but back then, it was revolutionary.
I was transitioning into from the gang culture to the drug culture.
'Cause I always like getting money. And I like nice things, fast women, you know.
His network moved massive quantities, hundreds of kilos a month, distributed through lieutenants like George Raymond Wright, known as Shug, who handled shipments across Northern California. Tootie didn't just make money, he created an economy, a new type of criminal class. In Snowfall, his presence is everywhere, even if his name isn't. The Saints world is built on the system Tootie designed. You can see him in Jerome's old-school loyalty, in Leon's evolving sense of order, and in Kane's street diplomacy. They all inherit fragments of Reese's playbook. Jerome's belief in doing business clean mirrors Tootie's disciplined approach. Leon's gradual understanding of leadership, of being more than muscle, reflects the kind of structure Reese demanded from his crew. And Kane, the hybrid of street and strategy, carries the same quiet balance Tootie was known for. Ruthless when needed, but smart enough to know when to step back.
I'm retired, but the connections I have, you know, it's like a gang member. You know, they getting money right now, some of them. But if I was to have a problem with somebody, I might send the Navy SEAL at your house.
But power built on proximity is fragile. Tootie believed in being hands-on, too hands-on. Where later kingpins like Franklin Saint operated through layers of distance and deniability, Tootie still believed he had to be in the room, calling the shots, even at the deals themselves. That old-school pride became his undoing. He involved his family directly in the business. His wife, Linda, who was known for pulling up to transactions in a green Rolls-Royce to deliver narcotics, and even his teenage son, who once sold an ounce of cocaine to undercover agents. That moment, mixing family with a game, symbolized the end of an era. The feds had been watching him for months. When they finally moved in, it wasn't for a massive bust. Just 2 kilograms, a small deal by his standards, buried him under a 35-year sentence. Linda got 10. It was a signal from law enforcement that the old lords were done. A new, harsher system was taking over. Tootie was locked away just before the streets transformed into a war zone. In some ways, prison saved him from the chaos that came next, the one Franklin Saint walked straight into in Snowfall. Reese did his time quietly. No snitching, no book deals, no press. When he got out decades later, the city had changed beyond recognition. The rules he wrote had evolved into something meaner, faster, and bloodier, but his fingerprints were still everywhere. That's why Snowfall doesn't give him a single character, because he isn't just one man's inspiration, he's the foundation, the quiet architect behind the ambition, the codes, and the contradictions of everyone we see on screen. When Jerome preaches respect, when Leon fights to balance order with conscience, when Kane demands discipline, that's Tootie's ghost echoing through fiction. Gary Webb inspired Irene, the journalist. Gary Webb wasn't a drug dealer or a gang member, but in the story of Downfall, he's one of the most dangerous figures because he went after the truth. Long before the series ever aired, Webb had already lived a story that blurred the line between journalism and conspiracy, between patriotism and betrayal. He was the investigative reporter who exposed a government secret so explosive, it shook the very foundations of how America viewed the crack epidemic. His work and the destruction that followed became the blueprint for Irene, the doomed journalist who got too close to Franklin Saint's truth. In 1996, Webb dropped his bombshell, Dark Alliance. The 3-part series linked CIA-backed Contra rebels fighting a proxy war in Nicaragua to networks flooding south-central Los Angeles. His reporting traced the drug pipeline from like Danilo Blandon straight to Freeway Ricky Ross, revealing how profits from the crack trade were allegedly funneled to fund the Contras war effort.
And in 1996, I wrote a series of stories entitled Dark Alliance, which was about CIA involvement in drug trafficking.
It wasn't just about drugs. It was about the US government turning a blind eye or even participating in poisoning its own communities. For people in black neighborhoods who had long suspected something deeper behind the sudden rise of crack, Webb's reporting felt like validation. It confirmed what they'd been screaming for years, that this wasn't just street crime, it was systemic. But the establishment didn't want validation, they wanted silence. Within weeks, the New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times launched a coordinated campaign to tear Webb apart. They nitpicked his sources, questioned his methods, and framed him as a reckless reporter chasing sensationalism. Under the weight of that assault, his editors at the San Jose Mercury News backed away from him. The paper issued a half apology, leaving Webb stranded, discredited, unemployed, and isolated. It was a slow assassination, professional, then personal. 2 years later, in 1998, the CIA's own Inspector General quietly released a report confirming much of what Webb had claimed, but by then his career was already dead, and 6 years after that, he was found in his home with 2 gunshot wounds to the head, ruled a suicide. The coroner had to publicly defend the possibility that someone could shoot themselves twice. Even in death, Webb's story was treated as an inconvenience to be explained away. In Snowfall, Irene Abe walks the same path, driven, fearless, and dangerously close to the truth. Like Webb, she pieces together the link between Franklin's empire and Teddy McDonald's CIA operation. She isn't part of the drug world, but she becomes another casualty of it, silenced not by street violence, but by the same system she tried to expose. Her death, staged as a drunken accident, is a fictional mirror of Webb's real fate. Both crossed an invisible line, and both paid for it.
The driver has been identified as local news reporter Irene Abe, formerly of the Herald Examiner.
Felix Wayne Mitchell, Felix the Cat. Direct reference, inspiration. Felix Wayne Mitchell was a man who built a myth. Born in the San Antonio Village projects of East Oakland, he rose from a teenager hustling on corners to the most feared and respected kingpin on the West Coast. They called him Felix the Cat, because no matter how many times the police, rivals, or politicians tried to take him down, he always landed on his feet. For nearly a decade, he turned chaos into an empire, one built on fear and an organization that ran with military precision. Felix redefined the drug business. While most crews were scattered and impulsive, he structured his operation like a corporation. He called his group My Other Brother, better known as the 69 Mob, and it stretched through East Oakland like a private army. His network pulled in up to $500,000 a week, an unheard figure for the time. And what made him even more dangerous was his innovation, using children as young as 8 to serve as lookouts, because police were less likely to suspect them.
Felix also hired kids to be the lookout around the projects, paying them $100 a day to yell out if they saw police cars coming. Felix made sure if you didn't live in the projects or you weren't there to buy drugs, you weren't getting in.
To outsiders, it was ruthless. To Felix, it was business. Under his leadership, the 69 Mob turned the housing projects into a closed-loop system. Nothing moved without his approval. That level of control brought him enemies, most notably the rival Funktown USA gang and the Mickey Moore family. Turf wars became inevitable, but Felix stayed untouchable. He drove Rolls-Royces through Oakland, sponsored community events, and became a strange kind of local hero, a man both feared and admired. When Snowfall shows Franklin Saint at the height of his empire, calm in the middle of stormy streets, that's Felix Mitchell. The quiet control, the structure, the sense that every corner answers to him. It's all rooted in Mitchell's model. Even Franklin's calm confidence, the way he can walk into a room full of killers and command silence, mirrors how people spoke of Felix in his prime. He wasn't just a dealer, he was the order in the chaos. But order doesn't last in that world. In 1985, Mitchell was convicted of drug trafficking and multiple murders. A year later, just 2 days before his 32nd birthday, he was stabbed to death in federal prison. His fall triggered what criminologists later called the Mitchell paradox, the idea that when a central figure like him is removed, the vacuum of power creates far greater chaos. Within weeks of his death, Oakland erupted in violence as smaller crews fought for control of the streets he once ruled effortlessly. That's the kind of myth Snowfall borrowed. When Franklin is shot and left in a coma, the streets descend into chaos, the same kind of disorder Oakland saw after Felix's death. The message is the same. When the kingpin falls, the system unravels. The peace was never real. It was only fear holding everything together. Darryl Lil D. Reed also inspired Franklin Saint. Oakland's teenage prodigy in the drug world, Darryl Lil D. Reed wasn't the reckless street kid people imagined when they thought of crack dealers. He was calm, calculating, and frighteningly efficient. Born in 1968 in East Oakland, San Antonio Village Projects, the same environment that raised Felix Mitchell, Lil D started running errands for dealers before he was even a teenager. By the time he hit 15, he was already studying the business, watching who made money, who got caught, and what mistakes to avoid. Felix Mitchell was his biggest inspiration. The Rolls Royces, the money, the community respect, all of it left a mark on Lil D. But where Felix was loud and visible, Lil D was quiet and structured. He didn't just want money, he wanted order. He learned that chaos got you killed and efficiency made you rich. By the late 1980s, when most kids his age were worried about prom, Lil D was managing an empire that federal prosecutors later compared to a Fortune 500 company.
So at the time, Felix and them had an operation going on in Oakland. So I was exposed to that environment by spending a lot of time over at my grandmother's house in the projects, because she used to babysit me a lot because my dad and mom both worked. So that's why people think that Felix is my blood uncle, but I always try to explain to people he's not my blood uncle. I just spent a lot of time around him.
He was 20 years old and worth millions, moving hundreds of kilos of in a month. Federal documents showed he was earning more than college graduates with business degrees. He even kept ledgers and operated through an informal hierarchy. Lieutenants, distributors, and runners, like a legitimate corporation. Violence was bad for business, and he knew that. Unlike many kingpins of the era, Lil D avoided unnecessary conflict, preferring discipline over fear. He wasn't trying to be a gangster. He was trying to be a boss. That's exactly the mold Snowfall carved Franklin Saint from. The calm voice in a storm, the man who prefers meetings over mayhem, the one who talks like an executive even when he's surrounded by killers. That's Lil D all the way. Franklin's early seasons mirror Reed's mindset. Young, brilliant, and so sure he could outthink the system that had crushed every hustler before him. Both treated the streets like a classroom and the drug trade like a startup.
You ran it more corporate than the guys before you.
Stressed it to the guys that worked for me and that was hustling in the streets to not be mistreating the people who come and buying the drugs from you, because don't mistreat these people. That could be your auntie or your uncle.
But brilliance has limits when the system wants you gone. In December 1988, Lil D was arrested at just 20 years old. He was charged with conspiracy to distribute over 1,000. It wasn't just a drug case anymore. The government was sending a message. That charge made headlines. He was reportedly the youngest person in U.S. history to face it. They saw him not just as a street dealer, but a criminal executive. At 21, he was sentenced to 35 years without parole. No plea deals, no reduced time, just a life frozen in its prime. While Franklin Saint's downfall in Snowfall ends in a slow fade, a loss of power, sanity, and purpose, Lil D's end came instantly, through the sound of a cell door closing. He spent 26 years in prison, where he changed completely. He studied law, wrote his autobiography Wait, and mentored others, even rappers who came to see him as a symbol of both brilliance and tragedy. Brian Waterhead Bo Bennett also inspired Franklin Saint. Born around 1964, Brian Waterhead Bo Bennett started in electrical contracting and liquor distribution, legitimate work, before realizing there was more money, faster in a business that didn't file taxes. By 19, he had already done what most dealers in South Central could only dream of. He went straight to the source. That source was Mario Ernesto Villabona Alvarado, a top-level contact in the Cali cartel. Through him, Bennett got a direct line to pure, uncut product, and from there, his empire grew with industrial precision.
I heard about Waterhead Bo Bennett, and I heard he had a crime partner named Mario in Colombia. I heard that Bo Bennett got caught up with a Colombian guy.
1,000 kilograms a week. That's over a ton of crack flooding American cities from Los Angeles to Detroit. His customers weren't addicts, they were other kingpins. The scale alone made him untouchable for a while. He was supplying the suppliers, feeding networks that reached all the way to figures like Michael Harry O. Harris and Rayful Edmond.
Heard that he kind of like ran the West Side, with the multi kilograms keys. And I never had actually seen Waterhead Bo, but I always heard about different things and different people he messed with.
If Franklin Saint was the dream, a young, sharp hustler trying to build something clean from something dirty, Bennett was the reality that dream came from. Everything Franklin built in Snowfall was chasing what Bo already had, a steady, cartel-backed pipeline and a financial system that made the dirty look legitimate. Bennett owned 4 check cashing outlets in Los Angeles, not just fronts, but actual functioning businesses designed to consolidate and clean his money. He used international banks in Denmark and Panama for deeper laundering, years before most street dealers even knew what an offshore account was. And it wasn't just the business sense, it was the discipline. When Bennett bought luxury cars, he didn't pay in cash. He took out small, regular bank loans to avoid IRS flags. That kind of detail is the same instinct that made Franklin so dangerous, the ability to play businessman and criminal at the same time. They both believed you could outsmart the system if you just kept it neat enough, quiet enough, respectable enough. Michael Harry O. Harris, Inspired Kane, and other kingpin characters. Michael Harry O. Harris was the kind of kingpin who didn't need to make a scene to control the room. He ran a massive cocaine network that stretched from LA to New York, moving product through the same channels that connected him to the Cali cartel via Mario Villabona Alvarado. His affiliations with the bounty hunter Bloods gave him credibility on the corners, but his real power came from the discipline and scale of his operations, the kind of influence that could quietly command loyalty and fear without a single public confrontation. By the time Harris's organization reached its peak, he was generating an estimated $10 million a month. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he had an eye for business beyond the street. He invested in a deli, a limousine service, a car rental agency, and even a beauty shop. He didn't just chase wealth, he created structures to maintain and multiply it. And while most kingpins were content to watch their money stack up in storage units or hidden apartments, Harris did something unusual. He began channeling those profits into legitimate cultural ventures. One of his boldest moves was backing a Broadway play called Checkmates, starring Denzel Washington, using illicit earnings to enter a space no street dealer had dominated before.
What does it actually take? He told me that we could be 50-50 partners for about $1.5 million.
His story is where the inspiration for Kane Hamilton in Snowfall comes into sharp focus. Kane represents the old guard, men who wield influence through both fear and strategy, who understand that crime is a system. Harris embodied that duality. He was ruthless when necessary, willing to eliminate threats like James Lester, an employee he suspected of stealing $100,000. Lester survived, testified against him, and that alone led to Harris's arrest and a sentence of 28 years to life. In the show, Kane's return from prison to reclaim territory and enforce old rules mirrors Harris's real-life drive to maintain control, even when the game shifted around him.
Broken family to look after. Old friends to shoot at. Old friends, more like little brothers.
What makes Harris unique in the tapestry of Snowfall's inspirations is his ability to operate from behind bars. While incarcerated, he invested $1.5 million in what would become Death Row Records, co-founding one of the most influential labels in hip-hop history. He didn't just sit out his sentence, he moved pieces on a national cultural chessboard, shaping music, power, and influence while physically confined. His wife, Lydia Harris, later secured a $107 million civil judgment against Death Row, a posthumous validation of his business acumen and foresight. That blend of criminal and cultural capital, of fear on the streets and control in boardrooms, is precisely what Kane embodies when he negotiates, threatens, and strategizes against Franklin Saint.